Thank you all for coming today. We're here at the Dover Public Library. Super excited to have Malin Clyde from the UNH Cooperative Extension here joining us to talk about local citizen science initiatives. We're so excited because this is really a kickoff event for us. Here at the Dover Library, we're going to be starting several citizen science informational programs, how-tos, and like take action programs throughout this summer and going forward into the future. We have a handful of new take and use kits that can be borrowed here at the library so that you can get involved with like ready-made, easy to use, family-friendly kits. We'll be talking about those later on. But first, we invited Malin here to share some of her expertise, some of her experience with her Nature Groupie project, and about what the resources that the UNH Cooperative Extension has made available to those of us in Dover, in New Hampshire, and in the nation. It's really quite a lot of exciting things happening in citizen science right now. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that. Thanks for coming today. And if you have any questions, you can post them in the chat of the meeting. If you're on Facebook Live, you can post them in the comments section. If we see them, we'll get a chance to ask Malin about those after a short presentation, and then feel free to keep commenting because we can answer questions at any time, even after we're done with today's presentation. So thank you, Malin. And if we had a crowd to applause, we would all do that for you right now. But we are super excited to have you and super excited about citizen science. So please, Malin, take it away.
Great. Hi, everybody. I'm going to share my screen right now. So everybody cross your fingers again. And does that work? Do you all see it?
It looks great.
Okay, good. All right, that's what I wanted to hear. I'm getting some other weird things on my computer screen. So welcome, everybody. My name is Malin Clyde, and I work for the University of New Hampshire Cooperative Extension, which means that part of my job is to take the research of the university, of UNH, out into communities like in programs just like this. So I'm really excited to be here. And I've never worked with the Dover Library before, but you're kind of my neighbor. I live and work in Durham. So very cool to be kind of in my neighborhood. And the Dover Library staff asked me to come and share information about something called citizen and community science. And that's really just a cool way that anyone, no matter how old you are or how much schooling you have or any of your background or interests, you can be involved in doing real science and collaborating with science researchers. And there's all kinds of topics, which we'll get into later, but the most common ones are environmental topics, and that's really my background and interest. So that's what I'm gonna focus on today. But there's other ones that have to do with like space science and brain science and language science, all kinds of things that you can get involved in. But since you'll hear a little bit about my background and what I do at UNH, which is really focused on natural resources and nature. So that means a focus on plants, birds, wildlife, insects, climate, even the night sky. So we'll hear about a bunch of different projects. So I'll first start off by sharing information about myself and what I do at Cooperative Extension, and then I'll share a little about citizen and community science, like writ large, like what that means, what it is, and why it's gotten really popular lately, which is like probably in the last 10 years or so. Then I'll share some examples of projects that you could explore yourself here in New Hampshire, or ones that are based like actually worldwide, and show you how to find even more projects looking on some websites. And then finally, I'll finish by sharing a very specific project called a Bio Blitz that's coming up. It's going to be organized by my team at Nature Groupie, which is one of our projects at UNH Extension. And it's coming up in September, and anyone from anywhere in New Hampshire, including the town of Dover, or the city of Dover, I guess, we all are a city, can join that and do research together. So that's what I'll finish up with, and then we'll pass it back to the library staff, and they're going to tell you about these new kits that they have. So I'm really excited to hear about that too. So with that,
wonderful. We're really excited. Thank you.
Sure. So in my job at UNH, that's me pointing to a plant on the ground on the left. I do outreach and education about natural resources. So that means trees and wildlife, plants, and I have a special interest in volunteering for the environment. So most of my work is trying to help and teach people about how they can care for lands and waters as volunteers. So that's something that we call stewardship. It means things like maintaining trails or planting trees or removing invasive plants, mapping the land, things like that. But also, as we're talking about today, increasingly, I'm sharing information about how volunteers can get involved in environmental research. So backing up a little bit, this is a picture of me. On the left, I'm in a light blue ski jacket when I was growing up in Alaska. So I was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. And I did a lot of hiking and camping with my family. As you can see from this picture, it wasn't always really fun. In fact, it looked like this a lot of the time. This is in summer and we're wearing ski parkas because it's so cold. It's also raining. And my favorite part about this picture is that we're wearing plastic bags on our heads because we obviously were not super prepared. So we had to choose between rain gear or cold weather gear, and apparently we chose the cold weather gear. But despite the bad weather, I actually really grew up loving to be outside in nature, especially in the mountains. And mountains are really cool because the plants on mountains change really dramatically as you go from the bottom of a mountain to the top of a mountain. And I grew up kind of getting interested in this, and it made me interested in plants and trees. So I always say, like, I'm a plant person. I have a lot of colleagues who are wildlife biologists, but I'm like more of a plant person. And it's really, I think, because of that experience, like growing up on mountains and hiking around and looking at plants. It's also maybe because plants are easy to remember because they stay in one place and you can go back and look at them later if you didn't quite understand what it looked like. You can always find them later, unlike birds and wildlife that move around. It's very inconvenient. So I really like plants. So I ended up going to graduate school in forestry and natural resources, and I learned about conservation, and it became a really big part of my work. So that's really what I just want to share a little bit about my background and how I got into this. And I shared this picture because it's one of my favorite wildflowers, and I saw it blooming this week in Durham, New Hampshire, where my office is. And I just wanted to share it in case anybody out there knows what it is. Does anybody know this plant? Because naming and identifying plants and animals is a big part of a way you can contribute to citizen science. Anybody know out there?
I certainly do not. Can't wait to find out.
Well, it's blooming right now, and the reason I love it is that it reminds me of Alaska. It's one of the few wildflowers that is present there and across the whole Arctic, and it exists here in New Hampshire, and it's called Canada dogwood, or it's known around here as bunchberry. We always called it Canada dogwood in Alaska, but here it's called bunchberry. Really, really, really pretty spring wildflower. So anyway, that's a little bit of like my own background and the science that that I do like every day when I go out on trails around here. So also as part of my job at UNH, I help connect people to nature through educational workshops and through volunteering. So this project I lead called Nature Groupie, which you can see the sign right here by my desk, but also in this photo, it helps connect volunteers, so people like you, but also people like these UNH students, to environmental projects. And they do trail maintenance and invasive plant removal, but we also get them to help with environmental research. So one of my favorite things to work on is this getting volunteers involved in environmental research. And that's the term that we use that's called citizen science. It's also called community science, and for the purposes of today, we'll use those interchangeably. There's sometimes some differences, but we just call it citizen and community science. And this is when both professional and volunteer scientists collaborate to investigate the world around them. And through my work at UNH Extension, I work to involve all kinds of volunteers, people like you, in citizen science projects, really tapping into all of our enthusiasm and interest in the natural world, like identifying plants like that bunchberry flower, and connecting that to researchers who might want to use that information to understand the world in a more scientific way. it's really interesting time for citizen science. It's really exploded over the last decade. And there's a new thing called the Citizen Science Association. You can see it on the National Science Foundation website. It's in the New York Times. It's in local newspapers. There's a whole Citizen Science Day and Citizen Science Week in the spring. Here's an article on the lower left of this slide. Somebody wrote an article for the New York Times called Why I Count Glass Eels, which are really cool. And we have a project about counting glass eels here in New Hampshire. So I share that because, you know, people think it's really cool, and we can do that right here in our own neighborhood. So the question is, why has it exploded so much in the last 10 years? And it could be that people are really interested in science education and interested in making science more accessible to people, or like we're worried that kids aren't learning science enough. But the real reason it's exploded is this. We just had the incredible ability to communicate so much more easily than we used to. So we have these amazing computers right in our pockets with our cell phones or iPads, and then we have the internet to be able to share information. And it's just so much easier to share accurate information through the internet and using our phones than it ever used to be. So when you're making an observation of something, it means you can take a picture of it, and our computers and phones can share the information of exactly where you were and what time of day it was. And the photo is really good, and it helps the scientists who might be at the other end be like, oh yeah, that is a bunchberry. Malin did know the identification of that plant. She got it correct, and I can tell she got it correct because I have the evidence right here from her cell phone. Before, citizen science has been around for a long time, particularly with groups like the Audubon Society, but before they had to use like paper data forms, and then you had to mail it in, and you had to take like a compass bearing to explain exactly where you were, and maybe even print out photos. Can you imagine? You had to like take them to the photo developer and like mail those in. So there was a lot of room for error. It was a really high bar for asking people to do it. So, I mean, it's such a great time to get involved in citizen science because it's just so easy right now. And because it's so easy, a lot more scientists and groups are trying to start new citizen science projects and get volunteers involved. So, really good time. But I also want to share that it's actually not new to involve non-professionals in science. Like, we think this is this new thing that's come about in the last couple decades, but actually humans have been curious about nature and the environment and keeping records about that for thousands of years. So there's examples of people recording the outbreaks of locusts in China over 3,000 years ago. There are people in Japan who was recording the day of the year when the cherry trees first blossomed in the spring. And that was like 1,200 years ago. Even the examples here on this slide, we have Linnaeus, who's the person who created the whole naming convention of all life on planet Earth. So genus and species and phyla and order and all that stuff. He was an amateur medical school student in the 1700s, and he developed this whole classification system for life as a recreational botanist. So he wasn't a professional scientist either. It's only been the recent maybe 100, 150 years that we have scientists like Barbara Askins here in the 1970s, who works as a scientist at NASA. She's like a professional scientist, right? She wears a lab coat, she's got glasses, she's got a beaker. That's what we think of when we think of scientists. But I would just encourage you to think like we're all scientists. And that's the cool thing about citizen scientists. Citizen science programs, if it welcomes us back into that scientific community. So on the right, you can see my friend Sam, who was helping categorize and count baby oysters back in 2016. So he's today's new citizen science expert. So one question people have is why use citizen and community science as an approach? Like, why would scientists be into this? Because, it may be more complicated to work with volunteers. And yeah, you might get good data from those cell phones, but isn't it, wouldn't it be just as easy to like pay a graduate student to go out and do it all summer rather than rely on volunteers? But actually, it's really cool because scientists get way more data and can ask really much bigger questions than they could if they weren't putting it out there to volunteers. So for example, you can detect, like, you can collect data over a much bigger geographical area. So it might be a professor at UNH who's interested in, you know, how squirrels use urban areas, and that person might be researching in Dover and Portsmouth, but if they were to collect the data and observations from volunteers, they could collect data across all of New Hampshire. They could collect it in Boston. They could collect it in Houston. They could collect it in San Francisco. So, and you can imagine the potential for collecting way more data across a big geographical scale is a lot bigger when you are working with and collaborating with volunteers. The other thing you can do is collect information for longer time scales. So there's a project that we do here at UNH called the Lakes Lay Monitoring Program. And it's a project where volunteers who live on lakes in New Hampshire collect data every week or every month throughout the whole season when there's no ice on the lakes. And they send those to the labs here at UNH, and they do an analysis to check for the quality of the water. And that project has been going on for 40 years. And you can imagine that's longer than the length of most faculty here at UNH. It's certainly longer than any graduate student sticks around. It has a life of its own because it has this system for collecting that data over all these lakes over 40 years. So amazing data sets when you're working with volunteers. So that's another reason that it's really cool for the scientists to work with citizen science volunteers. But what's in it for us? Like, why would we want to volunteer? And again, I think people are just like naturally curious. And I know that because I work with volunteers. And of course, like, I'm naturally curious and was as a kid and still am. But there's also this idea of it's really exciting to broaden science beyond that person in the lab, and that we have a potential to all be involved and increase our love of science and connect to the world of science. And in some cases, like, have more people believe in scientific research, like the findings that they think are true because they have a better understanding of science. So that's kind of why the groups like the National Science Foundation and many other groups are supporting citizen science projects these days, because their hope is that getting more kids and getting more families and getting more people involved in science in a hands-on, real way will lead to the public having just a better understanding of what science is and value scientific facts. So that's kind of another angle about why it's really growing and gets supported a lot these days. So now I want to share what excites me about involving volunteers, because I'm a volunteer person and I think volunteers are awesome. So this is a story, I mean, this is really what it's about for me, is I love it when I read stories about volunteers making actual, like, real new scientific discoveries. And this is a story from our neighbors over in Vermont. And they have something called a project around eButterfly, which is a place to report your butterfly sightings on the web and on the internet. And what they found was that the volunteers who were submitting sightings to eButterfly, they also have scientists who were also submitting butterfly observations to that same website. They found that when volunteers got involved, it led to faster observations of rare butterflies. So, like, with more people looking for butterflies, they were noticing the changes, and it was happening, those changes were being observed a month earlier than the scientists were detecting them. So that's really cool. So they were making, like, quicker observations, and they were providing new information for 80% of the butterfly species that were found in Vermont. So that's like new science that just regular people from their observations are contributing to. So that's exciting for the scientists, but it's also really exciting for us. If you're collecting something that's like new information that we never knew that certain butterfly was in that town, like, how cool is that? So it's really a win-win for everybody when you're contributing this kind of data. So These are just some of the, like, well, I'll show you in a minute. There's so many examples of citizen science projects, but these are 8 of them that I chose that I just sort of provide a good variety that are available here in New Hampshire. And so that means available to you, probably most of them to you in Dover. But a lot of people don't mind traveling for a cool volunteer experience, so I thought I'd share. These are some of my favorites. One of them here in the seacoast you can get involved in is the Great Green Crab Hunt. And green crabs are an invasive crab that are on our seashores. And you can get involved looking in tide pools for these green crabs. And you can submit your sightings and your photographs of green crabs to this program. SparkNet there with the cute little salamander face. That, I have 2 salamanders up here just because they're so cute. But SparkNet is trying to understand the amount of the biomass, which is the amount of life in our soils of red-backed salamanders. So these are really common to find, but they live underground, so that there's a system for finding them. And so that SparkNet project is all over the whole East Coast. And it's all about red-backed salamanders, so just one kind of salamander. Journey North is all about migrations, and you can track and submit your sightings of things that migrate through New England. The biggest one, of course, that they started with was monarch butterflies, which are a conservation concern for a lot of scientists because their numbers have been going down over the last 20, 25 years. So they really want to understand that migration of monarchs. And so you can submit your sightings like the first time you see a monarch in the summer. And they all get up on this map. It's really cool to explore that data on the Journey North website. A very local project that's actually coordinated in my office at UNH Cooperative Extension is called the New Hampshire Big Tree Program. And that's where volunteers, like are pictured here, go out and measure the trees on people's properties that they report in that they think are the biggest tree in the state of that type. So there's county champions and state champions for every different kind of species in New Hampshire. So that's really cool to both explore that data, but also might be fun to become a big tree volunteer. On the bottom, we have this project that is in southwest New Hampshire called the Salamander Crossing Brigades. It's down in the Keene area, and volunteers help migrating amphibians in the spring cross busy roads so they don't get run over by cars, but also they count them and measure them. And they even have tracked these spotted salamanders, which is in this picture. They can identify them from the spots, and they've caught the same ones year after year. So like really cool hands-on handling wildlife. So that's a really cool project. Beach profiling is also something in our region out on the seacoast. It's run by a project here at New Hampshire Sea Grant, which is part of the University of New Hampshire. And volunteers help measure the accretion, which means the addition of sand and the erosion of sand on New Hampshire beaches. So if you like the beach, they do it all year round, so you have to really love the beach. You have to love the beach even in February, but that's a really amazing project that they're working with researchers to really understand the cycling of sand on our coastline. Project Feeder Watch is a national program that is run by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, but a lot of people participated in their backyard. So it's in the winter, and you set up a bird feeder and you do these periodic counts of the birds that come to your bird feeder. And there's not actually that many birds that will come to your feeder in winter, so it's actually pretty easy. Birding is kind of hard because there's a lot of birds out there and they move really fast. When you draw them in with your feeder, you get a little more chance to look at your guidebook and figure out what those birds are. So that's a cool project. And the final one is people who love rivers. The VRAP, it's called, Volunteer River Assessment Program, is run out of the state of New Hampshire, and it works with volunteers to collect samples of water from all of the New Hampshire rivers, or all the major ones, and they analyze them and to better understand water quality changes in our rivers. So a whole variety of things, from rivers to wildlife, plants, birds, salamanders, all that kind of stuff. So really, really a lot of variety out there. I also wanted to share this one because it's really big in Dover, actually, in this area. So this is called New Hampshire Rabbit Reports. It's run out of with a colleague of mine here at Cooperative Extension, Haley Andriozzi. And it's a website that collects sightings of rabbits from people all over New Hampshire. And you can see there's a lot of people from around Dover who submitted sightings, because every one of these dots is a sighting of a rabbit. It's only been around for maybe 4 or 5 years, but it's helping biologists and the New Hampshire Fish and Game Department learn about the distribution of New England cottontails, which are a state endangered species, and the more common eastern cottontails, which are a non-native and really common, but also snowshoe hares. So really fun to explore this map. It's really interactive. You can click and look at all the pictures and see who submitted it and where, and it's very fun. If you want to find more projects, and I think we talked about this earlier, but Nature Groupie is, which is this project that we run out of Extension. It's at naturegroupie.org. We have a collection of over, I think it's now over 60 New England-based citizen science projects that you can explore. And you do that by clicking, I think this will work. Oh, there's a little arrow. You can click on the little citizen science here. Let me show you there. That yellow arrow is pointing that little citizen science icon. If you click on that on our main website, which is naturegroupie.org, it'll take you to this hub of all the citizen science projects that are based here in New England and that are focused, like the data is being used to make decision making or to help management of land in New Hampshire. So they're not the ones that are like all over the world, but they're very focused here in New Hampshire. So just on this slide, you can see there's ones about plants and alpine wildflowers and winter water quality monitoring at Squam Lake. So really specific, the gulls of Appledore, which is Appledore Island up in Maine. So really all over the place, but you can sort by location, you can sort by topic, you can sort by the time of year. So really encourage people to check that out. Really fun source of projects, and you can learn more about all of them. If that's not enough, there's a website called SciStarter, which is SCI and then starter. Right there, you can see the name at the top, scistarter.org. And that is an international database of citizen science projects. And they are just like all over the map. These are not just nature-based ones. You can see this example, there's backcountry pollinator survey. There's surveying for rusty patched bumblebees. So that's like one specific bee. There's one about the species of dogs. And at the bottom, there's Lingo Boingo, which is about understanding like language science. So again, these things are all different aspects of science, and you can connect to them and search to them, much like with Nature Groupie. And finally, I just want to share one specific project that we have coming up here based at Cooperative Extension. And folks at Dover Library know about it, so hopefully they'll be helping people get involved in this, but it's coming up in September, and it's called a Bio Blitz. And a Bio Blitz is basically a species scavenger hunt where volunteers like you help find and record data on as many different species as possible in a certain area in a relatively short period of time. So we're doing the month of September, and it's going to be happening all over the state of New Hampshire, and it's focused on town lands. So your data that you collect about any kind of biological life, which is like birds, mammals, insects, flowers, trees, shrubs, any of that stuff, that is collected on town lands is going to help the town and the city of Dover make decisions about those lands and help better understand the wildlife and species that are existing on the town lands. And you all have a lot of really cool town properties in Dover. So I think that's going to be a really cool project. It uses a program called iNaturalist. If you don't know about iNaturalist, it's a free app. It's really, really cool. And you'll use iNaturalist for this project, but you can just download it and try it out anytime. It's free. And it's an app and a website that's basically a social network for people who are interested in like naturalists and for scientists. And you upload data, which is basically photographs, with your phone of anything you find in your backyard or on your adventures, or in September, it'll be any town lands. And there are other naturalists and professional scientists out there in the whole world that will help you identify what you found. And so it's like crowdsourcing those photos and helping us all better understand and name plants and animals. So everybody who didn't know what that flower was earlier, if you use iNaturalist to take that picture, somebody out there, somebody like me who loves that flower and knows exactly what it is, will help you identify it using this program called iNaturalist. So I'll show you, I had fun today. I went and looked up Dover on the iNaturalist website. And I hope people can see this. But look at the numbers along the top where that green box is. In Dover, there have been 5,650 observations of species using iNaturalist since the project started. They've been contributed by 677 people, and they've identified 1,314 species just in Dover. So you live in a really cool place of people who are already really interested in nature, and these are all, if you're on the website, you can click on every single one of those dots and see the photo and the species of what has been identified there. And actually, let's see, 982 observers and identifiers have helped confirm the sighting. So they'll go in there and be like, yeah, that is bunchberry. Yeah, I agree with that. And then it becomes a research grade level of data. So then it becomes really useful for scientists to try to understand the distribution of plants and animals and insects worldwide. So very cool. You're in a really cool town for getting involved. So I hope that by next year, there's even more observations in Dover using this iNaturalist platform for the Bio Blitz in September. So if you're interested, and that sounds like a really cool thing that you want to get involved in, you can actually even start to hear about it through Extension. If you go to this website, which is just on the UNH Cooperative Extension website, or even just Google New Hampshire Bio Blitz or NH Bio Blitz, you'll get to a website where you can sign up to get bulletins throughout the summer. And we'll be doing a bunch of press on it later on in the summer because it's really not until September. But we'll have a project that you can join within iNaturalist, and you can submit all of your sightings to that project. So really looking forward to that. I hope Dover is like crushing it with the observations in September, and I look forward to collaborating with the library on that later on in the season. So with that, I want to pass it back over to the library folks to share some more specifics about the kits that they have put together. So I can't wait to hear about that.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Malin. That was a lot of excellent information, a lot of really neat resources. In particular, the Nature Groupie website I find is extremely user-friendly, and there are so many cool projects on there, so it's very fun to browse around. And since you had suggested it, I've tested out the iNaturalist app, and it is robust. It's very fun to use, and people of most ages can get out there and identify plants, animals, species. It's very fun, so thank you for showing that. We are about to show off the library's new kits that we have. Before we do, we had a question from Owen in the chat asking, will the citizen science projects that the library will be partnering with be centered in the Dover area? And let me pop that there so we can see it for the kits. And the simple answer is yes and no. So there are many projects that you can see on Nature Groupie that are pretty local. There aren't many that are only Dover, but there are many that are New Hampshire Sea Coast, and then many that are New Hampshire and national. And each of those, you are able to participate in much the same way, regardless of the scale there. But if your interest is really in the things that are unique to our area, as Malin had showed, there are a lot of pretty local initiatives, especially having to do with the sea coast and with the wildlife species in our area. The kits that we've put together are for projects that the information is useful on the national scale, but of course the intention is that they would be used in our area. So for example, Tina is about to tell us all about the Exploring Biodiversity kit, and so that'll be, we're expecting it to be exploring the biodiversity here in Dover, and that information could be used by local scientists at UNH or at other research institutions, and it could also be used on the national and global level. So there's a lot of overlapping there, which is wonderful.
So a lot of what Malin was talking about with the plants and animals that are even right here in Dover, you can observe just by checking out one of these kits from the library. So this one in particular is Exploring Biodiversity, which is plants, animals, insects, anything that you see in your own backyard or at a park, or if you're out hiking with your family and you're out, spending the day outdoors, anything that you see can be observed and written down, or you can draw pictures of it for either really little kids. So it's very family friendly. The instructions are very simple. If you wanted to check one of these out from the library, they go out for 3 weeks, and there's instructions in there on basically how to do that. It's really pretty simple. You're just jotting down what you're seeing in your own backyard. You can also use the iNaturalist app if you're unsure of what you're looking at, and it might be really cool if you found a new species of something, I mean, without even knowing it. Like, how cool would that be in your own backyard? So there's so many different ways that you can be involved in science yourself, just by stepping out, your back door. And so we're trying to make that a fun and new thing for you to do here in Dover. And we have other kits that we have a pollinator kit that's ready to go as well for checkout. And then we'll be adding more kits through probably the midsummer, and then as we're getting into the fall, there'll be more kits available for you to check out.
As Tina was saying, the kits are designed to be family friendly. They're the kinds that a parent, grandparent could take out into the field and observe. This one in particular is very interesting because it has a magnifying photographic lens that you can attach right to your cell phone or other tablet mobile device, so that you can take high quality zoomed in photos of local wildlife that would be useful in the study. There's information about the study and about identifying some of the most common local wildlife. And if something doesn't appear on that sheet, then yeah, that'd be a good opportunity to use the iNaturalist app to go deeper. These kits will be in the children's room of the library, and so feel free to come by and take a look at the kits. You don't need the kits to do the project. So if you came in and saw that the kits are borrowed, you could still we could tell you about the projects. We got these two designs from scistarter.org that Malin had mentioned, and so you could certainly get started without needing the kit. This is just a handy way, an easy way to branch right in.
So, and they include the pollinator, actually, the kit includes a big book on bees and other pollinators, wasps. It's a really neat book. It's got lots of color photos. So even if you didn't find in that book what you were looking at, you're going to have lots of other resources and other ways to find that information. But the best part about it is that you're contributing to science, like just by what you're seeing, what you're observing, what you get excited about, what you're writing down, what you're taking pictures of or drawing pictures of. And it all counts. It's pretty cool.
I know that as not a scientist, as a layperson, citizen in the world, unless you're told, you don't know that that you can contribute to genuine scientific studies. But as soon as you take a look at one of the resources that Malin mentioned, like Malin, what was the rabbits project called again?
Yeah, New Hampshire Rabbit Reports.
Yes, when you look at that and you see all of the data that that has been provided locally by just citizens, then you realize that you not only are you taking part in observing the results of scientific recordings, but you could also be someone to provide data, which is just really exciting, especially when you do it with others, when you do it collaboratively with a family or with other people in the community. So that's what we're hoping to promote with these new library kits. As we mentioned, we're going to have more in development, and we plan on doing more citizen science programming here in the library as the summer goes on. Tina, you had mentioned another program that's going to be coming up in July.
Yeah, so the middle of July, July 14th, we'll be sponsoring another citizen science event. And during that event, I'll be talking a little bit about how you can get involved with ocean and beach cleanup. The bin that I'm going to introduce then will be, it's a seashore, seacoast bin, all about oceans. And we're specifically going to be talking about how you can take your observations and act on them. So you're going to, if you're interested in doing that, you can become involved in helping clean up beaches and oceans in a very easy way. And it's a nationwide, worldwide project. There's so many different ways to get involved in volunteering and in beach cleanup. But this will show you how you can do that right here on the seacoast or at any beach that you're going to be visiting this summer.
Very cool. And then of course, we'll be helping to promote and connect people with the information for the Bio Blitz that'll be happening in September that Malin is hyping up. The library, we picture our role as a connector, connecting people to available information. So if you have any questions about citizen science, we're happy to answer them. You can actually put any questions you have in the chat right now. If you do it right now, then we can ask them to Malin immediately. Otherwise, if you have questions that come up later on, feel free to ask us at the library. And if we can't answer it, we can certainly connect you with someone who can. So that's how we focus on our role. Now that we presented all that, we're ready. We can do a short question and answer. If anyone has any questions, pop it in the chat. We'll check on the Facebook Live comments as well to see if anyone has any questions there. While we give you a second to do that, Malin, I'd love to, let me shift the focus here so that we're in the regular view. I would love to hear a little more about other apps that you think are useful for people and families. The iNaturalist app is incredible, and I'm thinking other things like that let people get out and get involved.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot, but I'm going to look at my phone because I know I have some on my phone. Well, I will say that, you know, the last 10 or 15 years, there's been like an explosion of creativity with people creating new apps. And so if you'd asked me that question 5 years ago, I would have said, oh, well, there's 25 to measure biodiversity. But it's been sort of the survival of the fittest app. And iNaturalist has really become the go-to, and it's the best one, and it keeps getting better and better. And the great thing about it is, I think you all were alluding to it, is that it helps you, it can actually suggest what you're looking at in real time. As long as you have cell phone data, you can take a picture and it will, based on, it's not just looking at the photo to see, you know, is it a white thing, is it a flower, is it an insect? It actually knows where you are. So it knows you're in Dover, New Hampshire, and it knows what time of year it is. It knows the date, right? So it knows that, and it will search its database of other photographs that look similar to that, and where the identification has been solidified. And so, I mean, if you think about it, it's like, it's better than a person, really. I mean, it's artificial intelligence. It's using this crowdsource of all these photos that have been taken, and it's saying, oh, you know, it's probably one of these three. Because and it's not showing you, you know, flowers from Africa or from California. It's showing you flower identifications that are likely to be right there in your area. So I just say, like, another plug for iNaturalist. But there are other ones, like I have one that's called Sea Level Rise, that is, you can actually use it to map the level of the high tide. So that's something that coastal communities in New Hampshire are starting to use to map what's called king tide, so that those occasional tides that are really, really high. And we're interested in understanding on a really local basis how high that flooding is happening, because, you know, the tide charts or the emergency alert will say, like, it's an 11-foot tide, so we know it's going to be at relatively high tide. But we don't actually know, because of wind and storms and timing, we don't actually know how much that's going to flood, right? And the people that live out in places like Hampton and places like that, they really want to better understand what an 11-foot tide actually means in terms of flooding. So that's kind of a cool one. And you can also use that to snap photos of really high tide areas. So that's something that scientists are really interested with climate change and coastal flooding impacts. They're really interested in collecting that data. So let's see, let me look at another one. Oh, I do a lot of work with something called invasive plants. So those are plants that are not originally from New Hampshire, but also ones that start to invade and take over native ecosystems.
That's a hot button. That's a hot button issue for a lot of the locals, I'm sure. And
yeah.
We have information on that in our Exploring By.
Oh, you do? Oh, that's awesome. So invasive plants are a really big concern. And so there's an app called EdMaps, which I have to say is not a great name for an app because it doesn't really mean anything, but it's EDD Maps. And that is a huge nationwide database of invasive plant sightings. And it's actually all open source, so you can explore the website. It's like got every kind of invasive plant and invasive wildlife from everywhere in the United States and Canada. And so you can use it to submit your own invasive plant observations there. So we're using that a lot for rare invasive plants that are just coming to New Hampshire, but it's really fun. That's a really cool app to explore too. You can tell I'm a plant person, right? So those are the,
yes, you definitely can, which is very cool. One of the resources that Tina put in the Exploring Biodiversity kit was this from the UNH Cooperative Extension Stewardship Training Guides, the Garlic Mustard Challenge. So that document is in the kit as well, if you were
that's awesome.
Interested in
that one's
commenting
here
that.
specifically on that one.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm sure there's quite a bit of garlic mustard growing in Dover that we don't know about. So wow, that'd be great. That'd be great to have people looking for that. And that fact sheet will tell you how to pull it too. So that's good too. So you can report it on EdMaps and then you can go pull it.
The specifics of it, and there's pictures of what the garlic mustard looks like, and like you said, how to pull it, and you know that there's no right or wrong. I mean, necessarily, because it's so invasive that I can just picture kids running out in their backyard going, I know what that is, and start pulling it out. And there's, you know, they don't have to necessarily use gloves, but they probably should. But
I mean, it's so distinctive. It's such a good one to identify because it so clearly smells like garlic when you crush the leaves. It's like there's no chance that you're gonna, get the wrong plant once you go through the little identification steps. Just finished flowering in our part of the state, so it's really obvious during the month of May. A little harder to find out visually, but that smell is very distinctive.
Owen made a helpful comment saying that the one thing that I found that the iNaturalist app is that it does drain the battery really fast when you're not connected to Wi-Fi. So Owen opts to take the photos first and then upload them later when connected to Wi-Fi. And I think that's good advice, especially when you're using both the location and connection data for it. So you can be mindful of that, or bring a battery pack.
That's great. That's a really good tip, especially if you have an old phone like me.
Especially then.
Yeah, you're out in the middle of nowhere.
There's another one. There's another app that's cool that's really focused on trees called Tree Snap, which I haven't used that much, but a lot of people recommend that one. So you can check that one out too.
Yeah, I did check that one out as well. It's really nice, and it's very particular. iNaturalist does most everything that the Tree Snap does as well, but there's no reason not to have both. We're coming up towards the end of our time, and I think we've covered most of all the questions. The one thing that I think we should leave on is, I know that you mentioned that you're a big fan of volunteerism in addition to citizen science, and they sort of do go hand in hand. So when you're out there and making observations and contributing to these particular projects, at the same time, some of them lend themselves that you could be volunteering simultaneously, or like one day you could be making observations and contributing, and then another day out there doing a beach cleanup or whatever it is. Do you have any final words regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, there's the whole world of citizen science, and there's a whole world of environmental outdoor volunteering. And at Nature Groupie, we very consciously brought those together, and that's because I think that volunteers don't like to just study the problem. They want to study the problem, but then they want to take care of the problem and solve the problem, right? So things like garlic mustard, you can report your garlic mustard sightings, but you can also report the number of bags of garlic mustard you pulled. And very much like what you were talking about with the beach cleanup, we're going to want to catalog all the litter that was picked up, like the number of cigarette butts and the number of pieces of fishing line or whatever. And you want to collect that data. But you also want to take that garbage and put it in a garbage can and take it with you and take it off the beach. So we at Nature Groupie we promote both. We promote that environmental research, but we also, there's a calendar of events. You can subscribe to our weekly bulletin to hear about both citizen science and stewardship projects and trail maintenance and all that kind of stuff. Because again, we want to track changes on the planet, but we also want to be involved in taking care of them and fixing them. So you can do both, and I really appreciate you asking that question. It's a very nuanced question, but yeah, it's great. So you on naturegroupie.org, you can go up to get the word get in the upper right-hand corner with a little mail icon. You can sign up for our newsletter if you want to get involved in either of those things. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Malin, for all of the information. That was a very helpful presentation. I feel like I know a lot more about the citizen science opportunities available to us. We're pretty hyped about the new initiatives that we're, the ways that we're connecting people with information here at the Dover Library. So for anyone who is looking for more information or how to follow up on what you've learned today, feel free to get in touch with us. We'd be happy to help. Thanks, Malin. I hope you have a wonderful time getting out there and doing some science.
Thanks. You too. Great to see everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.